What's up, everybody? Blessed be. My name is Mannun, and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. Please visit me on my other platforms as well, including Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon, all linked down in the description below. The full script of this video and most of the others is available on my Patreon account for download if desired to build your own Witch in the Working Book of Shadows. So, welcome to our quest through the mysterious and often misunderstood world of necromancy, Witch in the Working, devoted to explaining the mysteries of Wicca, witchcraft, and the occult, invites you to journey through one of the most interesting aspects of esoteric practices, necromancy. Before we dive into the deep mysteries of this particular topic, it's important to talk about the sensitive nature of necromancy. Many times lost in the fog of misconceptions and falsely seen as dark in pop cultures of today, necromancy has been a path of both wonderment and fear throughout the centuries. In many cultures, it's been admired, feared, or discarded altogether. Our journey into this topic aims to shine a light on its historical and cultural background, going beyond the stereotypes set by the masses to explore its true nature and role in the myriad of traditions that float around and amongst us. So let's journey down the crooked path into the world of necromancy, examining its ancient roots, its evolution through the ages, and where it sits now in modern occult practices. Without further ado, roll the intro. Welcome back, everyone. So, what is necromancy? The word itself comes from the Greek words nekros, meaning dead, and mantia, meaning divination. Throughout a millennia, necromancy has been tied in with the practice of communicating with the dead, which included telling the future, finding hidden or lost knowledge, and or manipulating the dead for a multitude of reasons. It's important to acknowledge that necromancy is not only about summoning and communicating with the dead. It's a complicated practice that mixes with our knowledge of life, death, and the afterlife. In this examination, I'm not advocating or promoting necromancy as a practice. All I'm aiming to do is offer some education behind this otherwise extremely misunderstood path, picking apart its history, evolution, and the different ways it has been taught and utilized across many cultures and times. I encourage all of you to learn about this topic with an open mind, respect for different beliefs, and an understanding of its extreme depth far beyond the one-dimensional descriptions often seen in today's media. Necromancy, many times seen as one of the most obscure, dark, and ancient methods of magic, has a flesh history that crosses various civilizations and eras. This exploration traces its journey from ancient origins to its modern reasonings in the worlds of witchcraft and other occult practices. Necromancy's foundations can be traced back to the very cradle of civilization. In ancient Egypt, the notion of speaking and communicating with the dead was essential to their religious beliefs. The Egyptians held a very deep and ingrained belief in the afterlife, as shown by their intricate and precise burial rituals and the famous Book of the Dead, a guide for the dead to navigate the afterlife with confidence and understanding. Necromancy in Egypt was seen as mostly about guidance and protection in the afterlife, rather than summoning spirits for prophecy. In ancient Greece, necromancy was practiced with a different approach. The Greeks understood that the dead could give us peeks into the future or advice on matters of importance. The famous Oracle of the Dead at Ephora and the stories of necromancy in Homer's Odyssey give us examples of this practice. Much like ancient Greece and ancient Rome, necromancy was blended with their religious and superstitious beliefs, many times performed by priests or sorcerers to access knowledge or help turn the outcome of events. The Middle Ages made quite noticeable and important sway in how many perceived necromancy. Christianity's infection encouraged a strong association of necromancy with evil and demonic forces. The church saw it as a custom that went against the natural order and God's will, lumping it together with witchcraft and denouncing it with a passion. These times saw a plethora of witch trials and persecutions, with necromancy often given as evidence as heretical act. During the Renaissance period, there was a resurgence of interest in the classical and esoteric mysteries. This era discovered a more scholarly approach to necromancy within the context of the broader occult practices. Alchemists, astrologers, and philosophers dove deep into necromancy, not just as a means of summoning spirits, but also as a quest for hidden mystical knowledge. Texts and scripts from this period, including works by Dante and Shakespeare, show us necromancy in many different lights, ranging from dark arts to symbolic representations of human desires and fears. Nowadays, especially within the worlds of witchcraft and other modern occult arts, necromancy has taken on quite a bit of a transformation. Instead of the actual calling of spirits to assist with divination or manipulation, it's usually seen as symbolically or metaphorically. In today's occultism, necromancy can be viewed as a way to connect with ancestral spirits or as a metaphor for deep introspection and understanding of the life-death rebirth cycle. This modern view is less about the practice of yesteryear and more about acknowledging the deeper symbolic meanings of life, death, and the afterlife. The pathway of necromancy throughout the centuries is a statement to its everlasting fascination and intrigue to the masses. From the ancient Egyptians' reverence for the afterlife to the medieval church's condemnations, and through the scholarly pursuits of the Renaissance, necromancy has been a topic that has continuously evolved over the years. Necromancy isn't confined within specific geographical boundaries. It is found manifesting in various forms across different cultures around the world. Let's take a look at the diverse traditions of necromancy in European, African, Caribbean, and Eastern cultures. In Europe, the perception and practice of necromancy evolved quite a bit over time, especially during the medieval and Renaissance periods, as I mentioned earlier. In the Middle Ages, necromancy was often associated with witchcraft and heresy in the eyes of the Christian Church. These times were marked by fear of the occult, leading to the persecution and often torture or death of those accused of necromantic practices. The grim and evil views of necromancy during this time was a reflection of the societal and religious turmoil that existed in our past. Hell, in some circles, it still exists today. The Renaissance brought a revitalized interest in the occult, including necromancy, but with a more scholarly and philosophical approach. This period, heavily influenced by the resurrection of classical ideas, saw necromancy as a piece of the bigger picture for hidden esoteric knowledge. Alchemists, astrologers, and magicians explored necromantic practices as a means to gather information about the natural world and the mysteries of life and death. In African and Caribbean cultures, practices much like necromancy many times revolve around ancestor worship and communication with the spirits of the dead. In these traditions, the dead are honored and viewed as guides, teachers, and protectors of the living. Voodoo, practiced in Haiti and other parts of the Caribbean, merges together ingredients from African spiritual beliefs and Catholicism. It incorporates rituals and ceremonies to communicate with the Loa, the spirits, also involving those of deceased ancestors. These rituals shine a light of importance on respect and veneration rather than control and manipulation of spirits. Eastern cultures, including those in China, Japan, and India, have their unique styles related to necromancy. In Chinese traditions, ancestor honoring is an important component of cultural and religious practices. The veneration of ancestors includes rituals and offerings to honor the dead and ask for their blessings. Likewise, in Japan, rituals like the Bone Festival, like in the Karate Kid Part 2, if anybody ever saw that movie, celebrate and observe the spirits of ancestors. In India, certain Hindu and Buddhist practices include rituals and mantras to satisfy and communicate with ancestral spirits. However, these applications are not usually seen as necromancy in the traditional sense. In modern-day spiritual practices, bits and pieces of necromancy have been adapted and inserted into modern beliefs and rituals. In modern Wicca, witchcraft, and neo-pagan traditions, for example, communicating with the spirit world is often part of ritual practice, but it is performed with honored and ethical considerations. The spotlight is on harmony and balance rather than domination over the spirits. In New Age spirituality, practices involving mediumship and channeling share similarities with traditional necromantic practices, although the reasoning and applications may be different. These modern-day practices many times focus on personal growth, healing, and understanding the connections between life and death. Necromancy in its various forms has been a part of humans' existence in spiritual practice across the world for centuries. From the medieval and Renaissance necromancers of Europe to the ancestral veneration in African, Caribbean, and Eastern traditions, the desire to connect with the spirit world shows us all a universal aspect humans longing to connect with the dead. While the methods and beliefs may differ, the underlying journey and longing for understanding and guidance from the realm beyond life connects these diverse practices together. The theme and subject of necromancy, like many other occult-based goodies, has not escaped the pop culture throughout the years either. One of the earliest and most influential literary works featuring necromancy is Dante's Alighieri's Divine Comedy, specifically in the Inferno section. Dante's journey through hell introduces readers to various characters and scenes that are flooded in the supernatural, involving altercations with shades, ghosts, and spirits. This view shows us the medieval concept of necromancy as a forbidden art, so to speak, in relation with the infernal and the divine judgment of souls. William Shakespeare also dove into the realm of necromancy in his plays. In Macbeth, the three witches, often associated with necromantic powers, play a crucial part in influencing the nominal character's fate. Their prophecies and manipulations, which can be interpreted as a form of necromancy, highlights the theme of fate versus free will. This is much like in Hamlet, the appearance of the ghost of Hamlet's father and the subsequent quest for revenge mix the themes of death, the supernatural, and the moral conclusions of communicating with the dead. In modern times, movies and TV shows have significantly influenced how necromancy is perceived by the masses. Often, these media portray necromancers as dark, mysterious figures wielding forbidden powers, strengthening the stereotype of necromancy as a naturally evil practice. But some views try to give depth and complexity to these characters, showing their motivations and the moral dilemmas they face. TV series like Game of Thrones feature necromantic elements such as the White Walker's ability to raise the dead, adding a phantasmal and dark aspect to the story. The series depicts necromancy as a powerful and feared art, making it very important to the story's conflict and mystical lore. The Game of Thrones also had remember the big knight guy? I forget, but he died in a fight, and he was literally brought back to life and was literally like another one of the Walking Dead. Video games have also played a significant role in shaping the modern view of necromancy. In many role-play games, RPGs, necromancy is presented as a magical skill or class option, allowing players to explore its powers in a fantasy setting. Games like the Elder Scrolls and Diablo series offer players the opportunity to use necromantic powers, often balancing the allure of these dark arts with moral implications and in-game consequences. I used to play an MMORPG, mass multi-online role-play game, way back in 1999 and to like 2002, 2003, called EverQuest. That game had a class called a Necromancer that would specialize in damage over time disease-based spells, and of course you were able to have a skeletal pet that you would awaken from the dead to physically fight by your side. These games typically portray necromancy in a more subtle manner, allowing for a range of character motivations and ethical choices. This interactive medium provides a unique way for players to engage with the concept of necromancy, exploring its complexities beyond the traditional evil sorcerer concept. The inclusion of necromancy in literature and popular culture teaches us the evolving attitudes towards this unique practice. From the dark undertones in Dante's Inferno and Shakespeare's plays to its many portrayals in modern media, necromancy continues to captivate the imagination of millions around the world. Let's take a look at the role of necromancy within today's Wicca and witchcraft practices. In Wicca and various forms of modern witchcraft, necromancy is not usually a common practice, but it can play its part in certain traditions or individual practices. Unlike its historical reputation as a dark art involving raising the dead for divination or domination, necromancy in modern-day witchcraft is often more about connecting with the spiritual realm, honoring ancestors, and seeking guidance or wisdom. Many modern witches and Wiccans view necromancy through a view of honoring and respect for the deceased. It can involve rituals to honor the dead, such as during Samhain, a time when the veil between the living and the dead is believed to be the thinnest. A good old-fashioned dumb supper comes to mind, where we honor our deceased ancestors with food and drink. To learn more about the dumb supper, see my video here, as well as link down in the description below. These practices are usually focused on remembrance, healing, and closure rather than summoning spirits for personal gain. And let's not leave out the traditional Ouija board to communicate with the dead, or of course the occasional seance that some still perform in this day and age. This being said, there absolutely are practitioners out there who call on the dead for darker purposes. I was recently told of a common practice where a certain tradition of occultism will take bones from a gravesite and combined with sticks entrap a specific spirit in a black cauldron so that it can be forced to do the biddings of the living, something I definitely do not condone, but nonetheless a real practice, which segues us into the next chapter of our journey into necromancy. Ethical considerations are extremely important in modern-day necromantic practices within Wicca and witchcraft. There's a strong emphasis on consent, respect, and the ethical treatment of spirits. Many modern practitioners believe that communicating with the dead should be approached with the same respect as communicating with the living, which I absolutely agree. This ethical stance is in stark contrast to historical views of necromancy, which often involved coercion or manipulation of spirits. Modern-day perceptions of necromancy also tend to focus on the symbolic aspects of death and rebirth. In this realm, necromancy can be viewed as a metaphor for transformation and self-exploration. Practices involving this method of necromancy may include meditations or rituals that help practitioners come to terms with mortality, loss, and the cyclical nature of life. Our witchy friends who decide to engage in necromantic practices often do so with a personal and spiritual focus. Some may use it as a means to connect with their ancestors, seeking guidance or understanding of their heritage. Others might intertwine morsels of necromancy and divinatory practices, using things like spirit boards or tarot cards in a respectful and controlled manner. And I must mention that it's important to note that not all Wiccans, witches, and/or occultists practice necromancy, and views on it can be very different within the community. In fact, many of you watching this video right now may have a completely different outtake on necromancy than the one I'm discussing. Some may avoid it altogether due to personal beliefs, fears, or the intricate and delicate nature of communicating with the spirit world. Today's necromancy within the realms of Wicca and modern witchcraft is far removed from its historical and sensationalized portrayals. Nowadays, it is usually approached with ethics, respect, and a focus on spiritual growth and understanding, though as I mentioned, there are some who never let go of the darker side of this path. Let's take a look at the practical aspects of necromancy, with a focus on ethical and legal considerations, an overview of rituals, and the symbolic and psychological realms of these practices. Very, very important. It is crucial to address the ethical and legal implications of practicing necromancy. Ethically, necromancy should be approached with respect, reverence, and sensitivity, particularly when it involves the spirits of the deceased. Practitioners are advised to consider the moral implications of their actions and the potential impact on both the living and the spiritual realms. Legally, it's important to be aware and adhere to local laws and regulations. Some practices associated with necromancy may be restricted or prohibited in certain jurisdictions, especially if they involve graveyards, human remains, or endangered materials. Respecting these laws is crucial to practicing responsibly and ethically. Now, if you need to be concerned about the legal actions with necromantic practices, I advise you now to change your course. If you're planning on digging up graves to achieve your goals, I can assure you there's a better and cleaner way. My advice, don't do it. While the details of necromantic rituals can vary widely, they usually involve some form of communication with the spirits of the dead. These practices can range from simple remembrance ceremonies to more elaborate rituals seeking guidance or wisdom from ancestral spirits. Common elements might include setting up a sacred space. This often involves creating an altar or designated area, possibly adorned with symbols of death and rebirth, photographs of deceased loved ones, or items that belong to them. Invocation. The practitioner may call upon specific spirits or ancestors, often using respectful and clear language, stating the purpose of the communication. Offerings. These can include food, drinks, flowers, or other items that are significant to the spirits being invoked. Divination tools. Some practitioners use tools such as tarot cards, pendulums, or spirit boards to facilitate communication. It's imperative to perform these rituals with an intent on respect and consent, ensuring that any engagement with spirits is ethical and non-coercive. Don't demand things from the spirits. As many of you know, I was involved in a necromantic type path at one point in my life where we would not only call on spirits and ancestors, but even at times demons from the Goetia as well. Even these ancient rituals were reformed and rebuilt so that we were not demanding anything, and we focused on inviting and sharing instead. Sometimes we were successful and sometimes we were not successful, but guaranteed we never ended up in trouble, and we could always release that which we conjured or invited. Necromantic rituals often have deep symbolic and psychological meanings. They can be seen as a way to confront and understand one's mortality, to process grief, or to feel connected to a lineage or heritage. These practices might also serve as a form of closure or as a means to honor and remember the deceased. Psychologically, engaging in necromantic practices can be a profound experience, offering insights into the unconscious mind, helping practitioners deal with loss, and providing a sense of continuity and connection between the past, present, and future. It's important for practitioners to be mindful of their mental and emotional state and to approach these practices with care and introspection. It does take a certain strength and confidence to perform necromancy successfully. If you're unsure, suffer from mental illness, sick, or just unconfident and scared, don't do it. That's simple as that. Don't do it. As we reach the end of our journey into the art of necromancy, it's important to stop and reflect on the key insights and understandings we've talked about with this ancient and complex practice. Necromancy, with its roots in ancient civilizations, has evolved through the ages. From the reverent practices of the Egyptians to the mystical inquiries of the Greeks and Romans, and through the fearful perceptions of the Middle Ages, necromancy has been a constant yet evolving presence in human culture. In the vast cultures, necromancy showed itself in diverse forms, from ancestor worship in African and Caribbean traditions to the spiritual practices in Eastern cultures. These differences show us a universal curiosity and reverence towards the mysteries of life and death. In modern times, literature and popular culture has significantly shaped our perceptions of necromancy. From Dante's Divine Comedy to Shakespeare's plays, and in contemporary movies, TV shows, and video games, necromancy has been portrayed in various lights, influencing public imagination. In the realms of Wicca, witchcraft, and modern occult forms, necromancy is viewed through a lens of ethics and respect. The focus is less on summoning spirits and more on connecting with the spiritual realm, honoring ancestors, and seeking guidance. This contemporary approach contrasts sharply with historical practices, emphasizing personal growth and understanding. Though, as I mentioned, some practices still exist today who dabble in the more historic and darker side of necromancy. The practical aspects of necromancy, with their ethical and legal considerations, are crucial for those who choose to engage with these practices. Rituals, often symbolic and psychological in nature, offer a means to connect with the past and understand our own mortality. This being said, necromancy must be approached with a very mature and serious mind frame. No dabblers in this art. I warn you now, you dabble, you're gonna get burned. As we conclude this journey, I encourage viewers to approach the topic of necromancy with respect and responsibility. It's a field thick with history, cultural significance, and spiritual depth. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of Witch into Working. How do you feel about the ancient art of necromancy? Do you practice a form of necromancy? Let us all know down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to ring that little bell to be reminded of wonderful and exciting future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Blessed be.